If you're someone that struggles with finding the right shoe type for your foot, especially if you know that you have a bit of a weird looking feet like many of us do, then this video is for you. Today I'm going to explain how to choose a correct shoe based on the type of a foot you have, so you can pick something that not only feels good, but it can help your foot function over time. And this isn't just a theory. That's something I've been using with my clients in my practice to help their feet move better, but also change the shape of their feet over time. In this video, we'll cover the main foot shapes I see in practice, the basic biomechanics behind them, what kinds of shoes work best for each of them, why insoles won't fix the problem if the shoe isn't right, and quickly at the end, we'll talk about performance shoes, especially running shoes. I actually got motivated to do this video after my recent mentorship group call, which I run, where we talked about the shoe selection based off the different types of the feet we see. So today I'll go through the basics, but if you want to dive deeper into these shapes and shoe selection and how we can influence the feet shape using the shoes, you can check out my mentorship through the link in the description. Before we dive into a foot types, I also want to address something that comes up a lot. A lot of people assume that zero drop shoes or barefoot shoes are automatically better. But in reality, most of the people are not good candidates for those. Minimalist footwear require the foot to be able to change shape through the whole gait cycle, and many people don't have that ability. So I hope throughout this video you'll also get a better understanding why barefoot shoes are not for everyone. For the sake of this video, we'll simplify things a little bit and we're gonna divide shoes in three simple categories: high arch foot, low arch or flat foot, a foot that can move through both motions normally. So a foot that can pronate and supinate when needed. Let's start with the last one. This is the foot that can move through the full gait cycle properly. As we heel strike, our heel or the calcaneus should be able to internally rotate. As our center of gravity moves over the foot, this tibia will translate over the foot, which will lower the arch of the foot down, so-called pronation. This pronation will increase the space between the inner heel and base of the big toe, which will put the tension or a yielding action into the tissues underneath the foot. This elongation here, it's called windlass mechanism, and it allows the foot to store energy and release it as we're pushing off. So this foot can conform to the ground when needed, absorb force, store energy, and then create force without major compensations. Because of this type of foot doesn't need much support. So those kinds of feet I'm gonna be most comfortable with wearing the minimalist shoe, zero drop shoes, or barefoot shoes. But in reality, most people don't fall into this category. So let's talk about two foot types that I see most often in my practice. The first one is the high arch foot. In this foot, this calcaneus bone or heel bone is gonna be stuck in this external rotation like this. So when the foot heel strikes, calcaneus won't be able to internally rotate. Because of that inability of this heel bone to internally rotate, the body's weight bypasses the midfoot and will usually weight bear on the outside of the foot. This means that this foot doesn't store too much energy because it never really gets to that windlass mechanism because this arch is not lowering down during propulsion. Very often that happens because that person's center of gravity is very far forward, so they're basically standing on their forefoot and kind of lifting the heel off the ground as they stand. Because of how often I see this forward center of gravity shift, I created a free 14-day email sequence where I send you one exercise each day to help bring your center of gravity back. If you want to check that out, the link is in the description. So let's talk shoe selection for the high arched feet. I'm gonna be looking at shoes which have a 6 to 10 millimeter heel to toe drop. What that means is that heel will be 6 to 10 millimeters higher than the forefoot. That slight heel elevation will help to shift our center of gravity back and start loading that heel properly. Next, we want a stiff and secure heel counter. What heel counter is that cup that goes around your heel at the back of the shoe here. So the easiest way to test that is to grab the heel counter and try to compress it down, and you shouldn't be able to compress this heel counter down into the shoe. This gives our body a secure point and a good reference because the heel is secured, so when we heel strike, we have a better opportunity to start internally rotating at the heel. To give you an idea of a heel counter that's too soft, you'll be able to compress it down into the shoe, and that's not gonna be a great reference point for your heel. We also want a shoe that is relatively neutral. So we don't want the shoe that's tipping out or in, but we want a pretty neutral shoe. Ideally, for the high arch feet, you want this heel to be as squared off as possible. Also, something like this will work. What doesn't work is something like that, but we'll talk about that once we talk about performance shoes. Also, when we look at the shoe from the bottom, we want this heel that it's almost as wide as the forefoot, so we don't want to go with this really narrow heels here. You can see the shape of this one. It has a pretty wide heel. Again, better for that reference, for that heel to be stable and be able to put force down into the ground through the heel. So as you probably saw, the shoe I will usually use for these kinds of people is going to be Brooks Glycerin. And just to be clear, I'm not affiliated with Brooks or any other shoe brand. These are just my recommendations that I see work in my practice with clients. Now let's talk about a flat foot or a low arch foot. In this case, the center of gravity is still very much forward, but instead of getting the foot rigid like it does in a high arch feet, this thing shoves down into the ground, so the midfoot collapses towards the ground due to the pressure coming from above. What usually happens is that this heel is still externally rotated like that, but due to the forces from above, the midfoot gets pushed down into the ground and we get this twist in this foot. And again, this is heavily influenced by the center of gravity. And I'm just saying that because no amount of exercises are actually going to be able to restore the foot shape if we're not taking the forces that are acting on the foot from the top down into consideration. So we should be fixing those first. But I talk more about that in my flat foot video on my channel. So let's talk shoes for the flat feet. I'll usually go with the same heel to toe drop or a slightly higher heel to toe drop ratio where the heel is slightly higher. So I would usually be looking at 8 to 12 millimeters heel to toe drop. But now, due to this foot shape, we want a midfoot support. If we don't support the midfoot, every step we take, we're just gonna be shoving the midfoot down into the ground. But if we do support the midfoot, the heel will start getting loaded properly so we can restore this motion throughout the foot. So because I mostly use Brooks for my clients, I will be looking at this GTS shoes. What that stands for is a go-to support. So this part right here at the midfoot, it has a harder foam material which doesn't allow the midfoot to shove into the ground. So the GTS foam prevents the midfoot from collapsing with every step you take. So a Brooks Glycerin GTS works in that case, but if the foot is really heavily compressed and this heel already starts looking collapsed as well, I will go with something like Brooks Adrenaline GTS, which has an even higher heel to toe drop ratio. And this is also a perfect example why barefoot shoes are not for everyone. If someone with a flat foot uses a barefoot shoe, we're basically just reinforcing the strategy they're already using because they are going to be pushing down through the midfoot. So now we're taking away all of the resistance, all of the support. So they are going to be doing the strategy in the path of least resistance and just shoving this midfoot down into the ground. Now that we understand the foot shapes and shoe structure, we can start talking about why insoles don't usually fix your foot problems. Every shoe has its own mechanical behavior. Things like foam stiffness, forefoot stack, rear foot stack, upper material, and shoe last shape all influence how shoe interacts with the ground when loaded. And something I see very often is that shoe insoles are made without considering the shoe they will actually go into. For example, let's say you're making an insole for someone that has a flat foot or low arch. Now you put that insole into the shoe that doesn't have a proper material on the inside of the shoe that will prevent the excessive loading of that area but actually keep it upright. or keep it supported on the inside portion. So as I load that shoe, the insole is gonna get pushed down towards the ground because this shoe doesn't have the stiffness and the foam material that it's gonna prevent that from happening. So now I might have a good insole, but if the shoe is not supportive enough, I'm not doing myself any favor. Which is why, in my opinion, shoe selection always comes before insole selection. Finally, let's briefly talk about performance running shoes. Most modern racing running shoes are built with one only goal: to propel you forward in space as fast as possible. Because that's what fast running is all about. You just want to go forward, you want to get from the heel to the toes as fast as possible, so you're not wasting time. So many running performance shoes will have a design features like a rounded or chopped heel that looks something like this, a very narrow rear foot, relative to the forefoot, because we want to propel ourselves forward from the forefoot and not waste too much time standing on our heel, but also a very aggressive rocker shapes, which is super great if your only goal is speed. But if you use these shoes for your everyday walking, gym activities, strength work, or even your slower runs, they can work against you. And that's because they throw your center of gravity very far forward. They drive you to load the outside portions of the foot and don't allow you to load that heel properly. This is why even my running athletes will use a more squared edge heel shoe for their daily training and slower runs, and keep the more aggressive performance shoes for their fast workouts or the races, since that helps maintain healthy foot mechanics long term. So hopefully this video gave you a better understanding of different foot shapes, the biomechanics behind them, and how to choose shoe types for those foot shapes for yourself or for your clients. And the next time you're buying shoes, try to keep these principles in mind. It can make a huge difference in how not only your feet, but the whole system feels and functions over time.